as law firm owners, you need to know your numbers and you need to know how profitable your people are, and you need to see where they're contributing so that you can have those intelligent conversations with them about their career development.
Well, hello and welcome to another guest interview here on the Profit with Law podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and I have a treat for you today. Typically, we have one guest. I've always wanted to do a podcast with like a co-host. And by the way, listeners, if anybody wants to be a co-host, reach out to me, let me know. I've always wanted to, I feel like having a conversation with someone else or having a third person in the conversation really can add a dynamic to the podcast that just makes it different, right? There's so many shows out there, and just adds another point of view. There's an old joke. This is a Jewish joke, so if anybody takes offense, I'm Jewish. I can make jokes about Jews, right? But two Jews get stranded on an island. They're lost for 20 years. They finally get found, and when they find them, they find 3 synagogues, and they're like, "Why do you need 3 synagogues?" And they said, well, this is the one he goes to, this is the one I go to, and this is the one that neither of us go to. So when we have 3 people in the room, I feel like we not only get 3 opinions, we might get more than that. So really excited to be inviting Brenda Barnes and Camille Stell to the show. Now, Brenda and Camille co-authored a book called Respect and Insight to Attorney Compensation Plans. Second edition was released in October 2024. And much respect to them for being able to put their book out there and price it at almost $200. I love it. I just checked it out. I don't own the book. I've never read it, and I want to read it, so I'll be splurging on $200 and buying it. But I think I just did a talk at the Law Firm Growth Summit, which just ended when I'm recording this. It ended last week. I don't know when this is going to be released. And I did a talk called Motivating the Unmotivated, and it was all about performance-based compensation for not just attorneys, but for everyone in your firm. And I think that this is a really important topic. I work with lots of multi-million-dollar firms in the low multi-millions, right? So small firms that are really trying to solve big problems. And what I've found working with my clients is that when we introduce performance-based compensation that is structured in a way to get results for the firm the way the firm wants them, it really drives the dynamic of the entire team, and we're able to do more with less. It seems like you're giving away more, but in reality, we're able to do more with less by having people be able to accomplish more that they otherwise weren't motivated to do. And it wasn't that they were lazy, it's just that they didn't have the right carrot. And there was nobody pushing them, right? Nobody measuring them. The moment that you put in some sort of performance compensation, it needs to be measured now, right? So if you're measuring it, you're paying attention to it, it gets results. It's actually, there's a name for that, and it's called the Hawthorne effect. So the Hawthorne effect basically, says that, when you start to pay attention to something and you put numbers to it and measure it, it's going to grow. So really cool stuff. So let me just give you the official bio for Brenda and Camille. So Camille is an expert in the area of law firm compensation, succession planning, and path to partnership. She and Brenda Barnes co-authored this book. I told you about that. Brenda Barnes is a graduate of the University of Texas in Austin in accounting. And by the way, I took out her middle initial A. I just shortened her name for her. University of Texas at Austin accounting, has her MBA from Texas State University. She's a legal and accounting professional with over 35 years of experience working with solo to mid-sized law firms across the U.S. Brenda has an innate understanding of best practices in law firm accounting and financial management. Brenda and Camille, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. I'm excited to continue this conversation that you've been having about profitable law firms.
Awesome. All right. So real quick, easy question for you both. How in the world did you get into this? What is your backstory? Why co-author this book together? And I'm curious, how did the two of you meet and decide to write a book together? That's always an interesting dynamic. So start with you, Brenda, and then we'll jump over to Camille.
Oh yeah, sure. Thanks again for having us. This is great. I've been in legal administration and working with lawyers since I was 25 years old. And so my evolution has been from law firm management, but certainly I'm all about the numbers. And I was giving a compensation webinar, I think, with ALA, and Camille and I. Camille was in the audience, and she reached out afterwards, and it has just been a wonderful friendship since then. Even though we are in separate states, I'm in Texas and she's in North Carolina. But we have a great passion for helping law firms get a compensation system in place that works for them, and really based on their culture, right? And kind of some of their strategic objectives. And anyway, Camilla and I have thoroughly enjoyed. We did just release the second edition. It's got tons more information in it. You learn a lot after you put your first book out, and starting. We've got a lot of tread now behind us, working with clients on all different types of compensation systems. So
awesome, love it, Camille.
And Brenda's right. I was in the audience. It was during the pandemic. A lot of law firms, I think, were very apprehensive about what the pandemic was going to do to their law firms. And I began to get more calls about how to handle compensation concerns and issues. And I'm a people person. So, as Brenda mentioned, she's the numbers, I'm the emotion. And after I heard her webinar, I thought, oh, she knows how to work the spreadsheet. And it's been a great match because I think compensation, the reason we titled the book Respect is it does impact the emotional culture of the firm, as well as how people are motivated and want to work. And I think the partnership, as you mentioned, you get richer conversations when you have more people involved. We had a richer conversation about compensation because I keep bringing the emotional piece to it, and Brenda keeps reminding me of what the spreadsheets say.
Love it. And I guess you're not the spreadsheet person. you got Brenda.
I am not.
I do have a little emotion.
It's always important to know what your strengths and weaknesses are. So, love it. And I'm excited for a great conversation we're going to have. So let's roll up our sleeves and let's jump right in. And just going to start with, I gave in the intro kind of like my flavor of, why somebody might want to consider this. But let's talk about this from the high level of the strategy for a firm. Like if the firm has objectives to hit certain targets, certain revenue metrics, certain profit metrics, how do we now strategically use compensation to help us get there?
Yeah. So, I would start by saying that you really need to understand the culture of your law firm and what it is you're trying to motivate, right? So what may happen in year one might be very different when what your law firm looks like strategically in year 5. And so it's okay to readjust your compensation plan based upon the things that you're trying to motivate. As I said earlier, I'm all about the numbers. I'm all about what you mentioned earlier, too, about the measures. How are you going to measure productivity and reward? Because from the one spectrum side of it is, you have the subjective criteria that also go into compensation plans, but you also want to take care of your high dollar rainmakers that are bringing a lot of of collection and profitability into the firm. So it's really important to kind of come back and pay attention to what your culture is, because compensation systems will define that culture and vice versa. So, if you are already sitting in a firm that's been 50 years old, and there are a lot of traditionalists that are still embedded in the thought process of that firm, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to start navigating that change, but you can. And so start with some strategic planning, right? Put at what top, where do you want to be in 3-5 years as a law firm, and start building that compensation system with that regard. And then the other thought I always reemphasize to clients is, what about succession planning in this piece of your compensation bill? Because you are going to get to a point where you have partners who are aging to the point where either you need to de-equitize them or you need to find a solution. Some firms have put in mandatory retirement age and that sort of thing, but moving the dollars in the compensation system is a very tenuous and delicate activity that happens, and it typically goes around origination of clients, right? My book of business, how am I going to transfer that book of business to that next generation? So those are some of my initial thoughts on just strategic plan, is really just getting to know that culture and define whether or not you can modify it at all.
Now, it's interesting because, in your, analysis and description, you mentioned the partnerships and partners aging out and all of that. And what I'm finding when I'm working with clients now is that, they're thinking that they started the firm themselves. They have no partners. They have key, attorneys that are really pulling their own weight. They're doing a great job. And they're asking questions like, okay, when should I make this person partner? And from my perspective, my answer is never, right? And they look at me like, well, why not? And I'm like, okay, that's the old version. So let's just look at the history of law firms. Law firms weren't allowed to advertise, right? The only way to grow the profession was to have people going out there and finding clients in some other way without doing Google ads and Facebook ads and billboards and TV commercials. None of that existed. So the only way to bring business in was to have somebody bring the business in. So the only way to compensate them for doing that was to, like, if somebody was able to bring the business in, that was the only thing the firm needed. So if they didn't make them a partner, what would stop them from just doing it for themselves? Nothing. So that's why partnerships exist. In the old version of law, you go to any other business model, you don't make somebody an equity partner in the business just because they've been there for 5 years and they're pulling their own weight, right? You make somebody a partner if they bring something to the table that the business is lacking and you can't get it otherwise, or it will be too costly, and now they come in and they're going to provide that as a service or a benefit, then you perhaps share equity with them, right? So I almost feel like the old version of law with the partnership track is something that is going to start going away, because that's not really, there's no reason to elevate people to partners when you as the firm have to go out and find the clients yourself. You're spending 10, 15, 20% of your revenue on marketing. What is the attorney doing? Your attorney just needs to be somebody who's a maximum player in doing the legal work. So we should compensate them for that, but they don't necessarily need to be a partner. So what are your thoughts about this new dimension, like the current next gen of attorneys and what we might need to look at when analyzing how they need to be paid, and are they setting their sights on partnership, or is that or is that something that you're seeing going to the wayside as well?
Yeah, I can jump in real quick, Camille, and then I know this is kind of your area, but I have a client right now that I'm working with that's a 40 attorney firm, and I interviewed all of their associate attorneys in the last month, and I would say that they still are very interested in that path to partnership, but what they want is transparency of how to get there, and making sure that it is definitive on what numbers they need to hit to move to that next level. So in other words, a lot of and I almost say younger, because this is definitely the generation I was talking to, they just want to know what's expected and how to get there, and so they can move through the different levels. So I think that people are still interested. I would say though that equity ownership is becoming more challenging to give away, and I think that it's why you're seeing so many more non-equity positions. And I think that's probably okay, right? Because if they can't bring more to the table to contribute to that net profit margin, then certainly having the title of partner sometimes is sufficient enough. But you still need to be able to challenge them through methodology to get them to increase total profitability. When you know all this, I mean, it's like, it's a way to measure them in such a sense that they feel like they are getting back a compensation that's worth their contribution.
One of the things that I would say is the reason that I became interested in talking with lawyers about compensation is what I felt like was a lack of sustainability in the model for small to mid-sized law firms. And what I really mean by that is a lot of the firms, to detour quickly, like, I think you're right about the way you make a law firm profitable, and it's often not diluting equity, right? It's leveraging more associates and employees. But what happens is the lawyers who started the firm or who maybe left big law to try to practice law in a different way, they're very happy with that model. The two owners are, killing it. They've got a bunch of associates and maybe even some non-equity folks who have worked really hard, who make this machine work. But now the two owners are exhausted. They're burned out. They've managed all the business of the firm. They've managed all the relationships of the firm, and they're beginning to think about firm succession. But what has happened is they've built a firm where everyone who's employed knows that there's no path forward for them, that they have been hired as employees and they've been excellent employees. They've been compensated as such. But the people who are entrepreneurial minded, who might have wanted a seat at the table, have self-selected out. And so now you've got owners of a very profitable law firm, a big organization, and it works, but the two owners have nowhere to go. And so either they close down the firm, as their retirement, or they have to start thinking of other options like selling the firm, because the people who were there are not interested in ownership. Just because of the 20 to 30 years they've been there, they've self-selected out of that path forward.
Okay. So we could take the path down talking about positioning the firm for sale. I don't want to go there. I want to stick to compensation. In your book, are you specifically dealing with attorney compensation, or is it the entire staff of the firm? Because I have some questions around that, but if that's not what your area of expertise is, we can stick with the attorneys.
We are mostly talking about attorney compensation, though we do see that having a plan is beneficial for a firm, because you can have crazy staff compensation that just doesn't fit with the firm. Either it's so low that they can't get the types of employees they need, or it's so high that it dilutes the profits. So, but we do focus on attorney comp.
Okay. So I'm going to stay away from other staff. I'm just going to throw this out there for anybody listening. I did a talk at the summit, which I spoke about earlier, and I covered everybody on the staff in that talk. So if you want a copy of that, if you want a recording of it, simply go to your email, send an email to info@dreambuilderfinancial.com, shoot it over to my team, say, hey, can I get the Motivate the Unmotivated talk from Moshe? And they'll send you the recording so you can watch it. Non-attorney positions in the firm, you have to be really, really careful about the ethical challenge of not sharing attorney fees. So you can't do anything with them that's tied directly to the revenue coming into the business. So just understand that when you're approaching that side of the equation. All right. So when it comes to attorney compensation, I mean, you wrote a big book on this, right? So it's not just a simple answer. Yes, we should pay them and pay them well. So what are we thinking about when we got to tie it to the culture? So what does that mean? What are we actually doing when we're looking at our culture and we're saying, okay, we want to pay these people well? What is the process of going through that?
One of the things I have seen is so we'll get a call. I think we could use a case study, as an example. Like we'll get a call and the managing partner says, here's our dilemma. We've got an extreme rainmaker who has kept the firm going, and he is getting close to retirement age. We have an extreme underperformer partner who is a great cultural fit. Everybody likes him. He makes the firm run smooth, but he doesn't even pay for his own self. We've got two partners who are doing fine, but they're not going to help us retire the senior partner. And the culture is one of, I would say, the benevolent father figure. That extreme rainmaker keeps everything running. The challenge there is, how do we move out the extreme rainmaker who wants to retire but feels they can't because the firm won't survive without them? How do we motivate the unmotivated, low producing partner? And then how do we get more out of the two partners who are kind of barely making it along? And what I've seen Brenda do with that is we have hard conversations with firms where we acknowledge to them what their problems are. And then Brenda works some magic with the spreadsheets and gives them options and formulas that will help the firm be more financially stable. They have to do the hard work. They have to accept a formula and take it and run with it. They have to have the hard conversation. But I've seen that as an option that works. Give them some ownership in how they're going to redefine their comp plan.
Now, Brenda, I have a couple of questions for you, since Camille just kind of threw you under the bus and said you're the one with the formulas. You know all the stuff, right? So I have two questions. One is about the actual thoughts that go into the calculation process, which we'll get to in a moment. The first question is are we talking about compensating them for bringing business in, or are we talking about compensating them for legal services production, or a combination of the two?
It's a combination, and typically we even drill down further to relationship management if it's a little bit larger firm. I call it's the finder, minder, grinder system that's been around for quite some time. I think that's a very sound structure to build off of that platform to customize your plan. But I always immediately ask for 3 to 5 years of historical data on not only the firm's financial systems, but also individual productivity, so that I can see origination trends. I can ask questions. What I find frequently is inherited wealth, is what I call it, in the origination schemes. And that's, obviously one partner leaves or passes away or something happens, and they, another partner inherits that book of business. And if their compensation system is giving an origination credit for that, then immediately, they have this incremental increase in their compensation from something they didn't really have much to do with other than managing the relationship, right? So typically I really dive into what does their client mix look like? What is how has it transformed over the years? I do individual interviews with all the partners typically to talk about it, because they will open up and tell me what they think their strengths and weaknesses are of their systems. It's great also to engage them in the process of solving the issues that they think are in their compensation system. And what I find most interesting is that when we get to the end of this process, frequently they do nothing at all. They may tweak it a little bit. They may make some slight adjustments, but it's really the evolution of the conversation about their compensation system and giving them respect. It's giving them input into the systems that they're getting rewarded for. And so it's a very interesting process, but I do look at origination. I think, obviously there's only so much client work to be able to obtain out there, right? And you alluded to it earlier when you said, a lot of spends go into the marketing budget, and it's not just the hustle and bustle of being out, at the bar associations and networking events and all of that, even though I think that's still critically important for professionals. But you look at all of the things, right? I mean, I'm sure you do this when you work with your clients. It's that you really have to get down into because it's not a cookie cutter. I mean, you can start with the FMG, Finder, Minder, Grinder system, but it's not a cookie cutter system. Everything needs to be customized, and we say modernized. How do we modernize this system to fit who you are today?
So, I mean, let's talk about the nuts and bolts that are going in behind the scenes, right? Like you're clickety-clacketing on your spreadsheet there, putting in formulas. There's got to be some sort of logic flow that you follow to kind of, figure out where, how are we going to pay these people? There's two pieces to it, right? There's the origination fee and then there's the performance, right? Is there a base salary underneath that? Is it just off of those? I'm sure the answer is all the above, depending on who we're working with, right? But if you were to say design something from scratch in the perfect culture firm where you're not needing to upend anything, and we're just approaching this from a fresh lens, would you pay an attorney a base salary and then have performance above that? Would it be just flat performance? What do you think is the ideal thing for a firm to do?
So I think it depends on the entity selection that they're. So are they a subchapter S where they're already, getting W-2 wages? So you have to take that into consideration when you're formulating this, right? It also depends on their classification. Are they a partner or are they an associate? Because I think associates really, and non-equity partners as well, work much better in a base compensation plus performance bonus based upon some objective and subjective criteria. I think partners who are supposed to be owners of the law firm, owners of the business, have to put more risk into it. And so therefore a more of a formulaic system works really well for them. But I think you've had that with all types of other attributes, right? So how do they compensate their managing partner? How do they compensate their practice section leaders? How do they compensate those that are really mentoring associates? All of these things, and when you take them through their conversations, and I have a scale of 1 to 10, how do you rate all these different criteria? You will find that they will rate some of it, some of these items very high, and then you'll be surprised at how the firm will say mentoring associates isn't important to us. And you're thinking, well, that's a little short-sighted. We're going to have to take you through some education as to why associate mentoring is probably extremely important to you. So I think, back to just, what the worksheet, the workbooks that I build basically start with a basic formula. They look at historical data. I look at how much money. I look at how, who has what type of client mix, and then come up with a system that will move them forward. There's always a reason why they're calling out to you, right? So it's usually because someone feels like they are not being compensated, and so when you start digging into it, and I did this with a client here recently, I said, well, let's do profitability by partner as well. So let's look at that model. And when I did, the guy that was screaming the loudest was not as profitable as he thought he was. And he was, the whole time saying, I should be getting compensated because I work my staff and I've got all this stuff that's going on. And when you put the, pencil to paper, he wasn't as profitable as he thought he was. And it really helped educate him on that whole process. So, again, I'm a number crunching, I look at it all different ways to see what magic can happen inside the firm. But I always bring it back to, what are we trying to build here? What are your goals? Are we going after new practice groups? Are we going after new industries? Or what is it that we're really trying to do? And how are we going to motivate the partners to do that?
Yeah, I understand all of that. Let me ask you this. I mean, let's just say we're giving a percentage of revenue that is being unlocked above their salary. Is that something that's going to increase with different steps, or is it hey, we're going to give you 10% of revenue, and that's and then that's their compensation? So it's just whatever revenue that they're responsible for.
One thing we've done is a bonus scorecard. And so set aside a bonus pool and then use a scorecard, and so that people are eligible for different amounts based on their, grading on the scorecard.
And I've set minimums that if you want to participate in the bonus pool, you've got to hit these certain minimums because, and especially in mid-sized firms, there's always they're always going to be that cluster of lawyers that are not working as hard, if you will, or what have you, as others. And you really have to say, well, that's fine. We give you, you're a great lawyer for what you do contribute to the firm. But if you want to participate in the bonus pool, you got to hit this minimum number because it only makes sense. And it's equitable, right?
Yeah. One of the things that I've been finding when I work with clients is I walk in and they have some sort of compensation structure already in place, but they're coming to me because they're not profitable or not profitable enough. And when I look at it, they're giving too much away to the attorney. So, they might be giving a third of revenue to the attorney, which does a couple of things badly. Number one, if you're giving a flat percentage to your attorney, then whenever they get to the number they're comfortable with, right? They get to, I have enough money, they have no motivation to go further, right? And then the second problem is that if you don't understand the dynamics of the rest of your business, I mean, we're gone are the days that a third is something that you can afford because you're spending 15-20% on marketing, you're spending 15-20% on overhead. You want to make a 30% profit margin. So you don't have you've got all the rest of your cost of delivery. You don't have a third to give. So when you do, it's coming out of your pocket, the owner. Is that something that you're finding as well when you work with clients? Is that, they're overpaying their attorneys, or is that few and far between?
Well, I think that there's still some of that, right? I mean, especially those firms that have been around, but some of these firms that are being created by the younger generations are, they're building it to sell. It's interesting because a lot of these, it's like they are willing to give away more to increase that top line revenue, to get their profit margins up to 50%, not 35%, right? So it's interesting in the philosophy on the generations and on how they're approaching a business, law as a matter of a business, right? But I will say that most of the more traditional firms are still having some of the some challenges of the non-producers, or getting to the point where they're nearing retirement, so they're slowing down, but they've got a 5-year compensation average, so that retiring partner, that partner that's nearing retirement is slowing up, and his numbers or her numbers are less than, but they're still getting compensated well for it. So it's just it's a lot of layers to unpeel.
I do think, though, that there are circumstances where lawyers are getting more than they should, and the conversation is just too hard to have inside the firm. And that's one of the reasons they're reaching out for help. So I agree. I know exactly what you mean there.
And it's a difficult conversation to even have with that individual partner. And I mean, lawyers by nature are conflict resolutions, right? But yet their conflict avoidance as well is very prevalent. And that's why they have to have somebody like outside people come in and help, or they a really strong managing partner, a law firm administrator that can help them navigate their way.
Yeah. I want to switch gears for a moment. One of the things that, Brenda, I know you talk about is compensation biases. Can tell me a little bit about that, and how does that play into this whole conversation?
So yeah, I'm very passionate about that whole piece of it, and a lot of that has to do with having worked in law firms for 35 years. I've just been able to see, and it's not. It's implicit bias, right? It's not something that anyone intentionally goes out and says, I'm going to discriminate, or I'm not going to give this particular attorney that opportunity. And so, one of the chapters in the book talks specifically about compensation biases and how to kind of break down those barriers so that you recognize, for example, partner A sitting in his office has two or three associates that work for him, but has a tendency to walk to the one right next door all of the time, rather than having a conscious decision about making sure that they are spreading out the workload to all attorneys within their group. So it's just making sure that you're very sensitive and conscious of how your systems work, how your origination policy is and conflicts are resolved, because oftentimes when you have two or three people that will go out and originate a new client, it's some of the partners can be quite vocal about what their percentage should be, and others are not. And so you really need to have a system where you can say, not a grievance system, but you know what I mean? Something where you have somebody that can say, let's work this out. All three people were involved in this origination of this new client. Let's split this evenly, or what have you. So there's just, the tall poppy syndrome is one thing that we see, a lot of, especially with female lawyers, where, they are working very assertively and moving up the ranks, and someone's got to, and sometimes it's even other female lawyers, has got to cut them back down to size, if you will. Mm-hmm. And, so it's just paying attention to the dynamics inside the firm. And you have to be conscious of it, because you are so busy as law firm managers that you don't have the opportunity always to look at those issues that are becoming prevalent in your firm, and you don't even realize it.
And one of the ways I think you can fight against that is transparency in pay. It is, when we look at the numbers, we see that it is often the women who are underpaid, the people of color who are underpaid, and the firm would have good reasons for that, right? Like, well, maybe this person is more aggressive about going out there and, getting work from the partners. So it's letting the partners understand the potential problems, making them aware of the biases, being transparent with the associates about their pay. So is there a reason? So let's say, for instance, you had two people coming in at the same time, one's paid higher than the other. Can you show that it was their appellate court clerkship that got them that $15,000 bump, not their gender? But a lot of firms say, no, we don't want to share that type of salary information. So transparency and intentionality can get you through some of these biases conversations.
And I think it's a good recruiting tool as well, to be able to demonstrate to your recruits that you've got some diversity. systems in place to identify some of this. And, the other thing I always say is, not every path is on the way to equity partnership. Have alternative paths that lawyers can pick and choose so that you retain great, talented individuals inside your firm. They don't all need to work 2,000 hours a year, and it's okay. And I think that firms are becoming better about this. I think, I think they've pulled back on the work from home deal, which I think is a big mistake. But I think that the more that they can demonstrate that they have a culture that really cares about their people, and paths to making them successful, whether that's through coaching or investment advisement or whatever it is. Because we all know what kind of law school debt they bring to the table when they first join the firm. So they're stressing about that as it is. So compensation systems and diversity and all of that are great recruiting tools, in my opinion.
Let's talk about this path to partnership for a minute. So, my opinions about this, but Camille made some good points earlier where, hey, you may need partners to be the succession plan of your business. So even if, partnership is not your modus operandi right now, that might be something that you need to prepare for. Or, maybe you need to have non-equity partnership as the thing that they're aiming for. But what do firms need to do to define the path to partnership? How clear do they need to be about that? What are we finding when you're working with law firms as far as that goes? Is there confusion, and what does that do to the morale of the attorneys that are trying to get there?
So I really like non-equity partnership for a variety of reasons, but that is one place where we do often see them overpaid to the point that they are, they get to sit in the partners meetings, they represent as partner outside the firm, and their pay is so good that there isn't a lot of motivation for them to want to take on the burden and the responsibility of being a financial owner and having, all those additional responsibilities and risk primarily. So I think non-equity path is a great path, but you have to build it so that you're awarding money appropriately. You still want there to be something to work towards, but I've seen non-equity work well for firms that they can't take on additional equity ownership. So non-equity is a great way to move people along. Non-equity is also a great learning ground. They begin to get more of the responsibility. They have more responsibility to bring in their own clients. They have more responsibility to be involved in management of the firm without taking all the complete financial risks. So I really like non-equity. And I think for some people, that is the end of the path. And for others, it may be a couple of years stop. I think the risk of not having a path to partnership is particularly important for these next generation of lawyers who are not interested in working until they're 75 years old. So, if you as the owner are approaching, that time where you're thinking, gosh, I really want to slow down myself, but you don't have people who are ready to come along and take your place, that can be problematic. And so what I mentioned earlier about people self-selecting out, they're still there. But if you were to ask them if they wanted to become an equity owner and make a pay-in or a buy-in, they would say no to that. So I believe what you do is you have conversations along the way, particularly with people that you think are going to be the future of the firm. What are your goals? What are your interests? How can we keep you fully motivated here? I think it's important that you communicate to them what your own plans are. This is extraordinarily difficult for senior partners, right? They want to decide, when they want to leave. They want to leave on their terms. They're not particularly open with their clients about what their plans are. They don't want word to get out in the community because they think their business will be cannibalized. But if you're not having some true conversations internally, then you really do run some risk. And I think part of the path to partnership is, hard skill learning. How many trials have you done? How many depositions have you done? How many hearings have you done? How many complex matters have you closed? But I think it's also the soft skills. It's collaboration. It's, a mindset that is interested in working well with others, for the good of the firm, not necessarily just for the good of my pocketbook. And then, valuing everybody at the firm. I think the days of the firm hierarchy where it's us versus them, whether the us is the partners, whether the us is the lawyers, whether the us is the most successful rainmakers, that is not a workplace that people want to be in today. Today's employees, today's associates, today's future partners. And I think you really have to caution against that kind of mindset and hierarchy.
One more question, and I think we're gonna wrap it up because we're almost out of time. When is the right time to be exploring these compensation packages for attorneys? I mean, and let's just talk to. There's a lot of listeners who are solos. They're trying to grow beyond themselves. So they're going to be hiring their first attorney, right? Is this something that they should be doing on day one when they hire somebody, or is it more complex than is necessary when they first bring on that attorney into the firm? When is the right time to have this conversation?
So I say it's different hiring an associate than hiring a potential owner. And so if you are further in your career and you are seriously looking for a successor, I think the conversation from the outset should be, in X number of years. I haven't determined yet, 5 to 7, 10 years. I am looking for someone who will be my successor. I think you can put that out there. I think it's also completely fine to interview and hire a lawyer early in their career, and you don't start having that conversation until maybe year 2 or 3, right? Let them get their practice legs under them. Let them start learning skills to be a great lawyer. But in those annual compensation meetings or those quarterly check-ins, ask them, how are you liking the practice of law? What are you challenged by? What do you wish that you knew more about the law firm and practice? Where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? So I don't think it's too early. I think you don't want to be so premature in the conversation that you scare the other person off. Because face it, early in career, lawyers are often, they just don't know yet what they want to do, right? They don't know yet what they don't know. But if they've been practicing for a while and you're looking at, more of a lateral hire or a 3 to 5 year hire, talk to them, with some intention about your plans and theirs.
I have quite a few solo clients, and oftentimes I think they offer compensation out of desperation to get somebody on to help them with their workloads. And then they have to reach out and say, help me with this compensation system. I've given away too much of my money already, and I need to dial it back a little bit. So I would say to the solos out there that are looking to add on, give some very thoughtful look at your numbers, make sure that what you can afford and what you're willing to give away at this point, because frequently it's usually percentage deals, right? That's the way solos typically operate with their. And I'm not talking about baby lawyers. I'm talking about those that got some experience behind them. So. I think, looking at your compensation from the get-go is what I would recommend.
Awesome. Thank you so much, both of you, for all this insight. I mean, really so much to talk about, and I'm sure we just scratched the surface. What I do at the end of an episode is I ask each of you I normally just ask one guest, but we have two today. So parting piece of advice or wisdom that you want to leave with our listeners, and then if they want to get in touch with you, ask you questions, take a next step with you, if you have somewhere that you want to send them, if they're exploring further information from this conversation, where do you want to direct them to? So start with you, Camille, and then we'll go to Brenda.
So LinkedIn is a great place to both connect with me and then get in touch with me. If I had a piece of advice today, I would say, think intentionally about compensation more often than once a year. The compensation plan you designed 10 years ago is likely not the attraction that you think it is. And so just start with annual review, quarterly conversations with your folks, and ask them questions. And the question is not, do you make enough money? That's not the right question. The question is, are you fulfilled in your work? What is the thing that makes you happiest at the law firm? Where are you getting your most joy? Is it firm management? Is it managing clients? Is it handling, very specific types of cases? But begin to have conversations so that you can learn where your folks' pain points are, what makes them happy, and you can start thinking about compensation is more than just the paycheck they receive once or twice a month.
Yeah, so I've LinkedIn and brenda-barnes.com. Love to link in with you guys. So I do think the emotional piece of it is critically important, and I think ongoing conversations and how to develop. But I do think as law firm owners, you need to know your numbers, and you need to know how profitable your people are, and you need to see where they're contributing so that you can have those intelligent conversations with them about their career development. Transparency, over-communicate, engage them in conversations continually, because it is about career development. It is about contentment. It's about putting everybody in the right path, because turnover is costly. And the more, if you don't attend to it, you're going to find your profit running out the door with all of the hiring that you're having to do because you haven't given some careful thought to this.
Awesome. Thank you both. And folks, we're going to link up those LinkedIn profiles in our show notes page. So it's in the description of your podcast player, as well as at profitwithlaw.com. If you're listening to this in a podcast player, it's also available on our YouTube channel, profitwithlaw.com/YouTube. If you're watching it on YouTube, it's also available in your podcast player, profitwithlaw.com/podcast. We'd love for you to check out the show, add it to your player, subscribe, so you get notified every time we release a new episode. We're here every single week with a brand new interview. We've been doing this since March of 2019, and we're almost 500 episodes in. Been consistent here with producing really top-notch content for you. Loved having a three-way conversation today, so looking forward to other opportunities to do that again. And this is a topic that is becoming more and more important to me as I work with my clients, because I'm finding that there's a lot of people who made their attempt at doing this, but have done it, in a way that's not really in the best interest of them, the owner, or the best interest of the firm. And then there's also this baggage that we're carrying around of 50 years ago, what a law firm should look like. And I think that there's, that's changing. I mean, we're getting into a place where, Arizona's got a sandbox project. I think there's another state now that's doing it. You're going to have non-attorney equity owners in law firms very soon. The landscape is evolving, and with that evolving landscape, that model is going to change. And you're going to have to earn your place at the table if you want to have equity in a firm. So you might want to think about what's your area of expertise? What do you bring to the table? Are you going to come to a firm and start another practice here for them? Are you going to come to a firm and be their person that introduces the technology that's going to make them more efficient? Are you going to come to the firm with all the marketing strategies, and help them implement that where they're struggling in that area? You want to really work on the pieces of the puzzle that you're gonna bring something that's missing. And I think that the days of the attorney being the rainmaker. Ask any law firm owner out there with 15 associates on staff. None of them are going out there and making sales and bringing in business. That's just gone. It's not there anymore. As much as Brenda and Camille would love to say that you should continue to go to those networking events and go to those bar association meetings and rub shoulders with other attorneys, I don't disagree. I think it's still a great opportunity. But when 50% of the marketplace is not looking at a referral for where they find their law firm, but they're going to Google, you can't ignore that either. So it's a changing landscape, and we're here to help you navigate that. So you want to make sure that you're tuning in to amazing guests like we had today, and that we'll continue to bring to you as we continue to talk about this evolution and how to continue to focus on the profitability of your firm. Continue to grow the firm without alienating your staff, without needing to have high turnover, but at the same time, not necessarily needing to have a path to partnership for everybody as well. All right, folks, take care. Enjoy. We'll catch you on the next episode.